What's up guys, Andre here, and today I'd like to use Tailwind CSS to rebuild YouTube. This is the second video I've done like this. I did the first one a few months ago where we rebuilt Twitter, and this is what we came up with. So we came up with this using Tailwind and Tailwind's utilities. So the purpose of this video is to explore how to use Tailwind's new plugin feature, which allows you to create new utilities that are not in the core of Tailwind. We'll make use of two plugins, one for CSS Grid and one for CSS Transitions. So here's a preview of the finished product. It's just a remake of YouTube, and again we're just using Tailwind utilities and the plugins I mentioned, and this is what I came up with. So we'll rebuild this entire thing from scratch using Tailwind. Now I'm going to be using the same repo as the other project, so we have to upgrade Tailwind to the latest version, which is 0.5.1 as of this recording. So let's go into my code, and here's the package.json file. We have to update Tailwind to 0.5.1, and then we can do an npm install. Okay, that's done. Let me do a npm run watch. There's one small thing we have to do to make use of plugins, and I just want to make sure we don't screw up what we did before. So here is our old site. It still looks good, but we have to add this new section over here, which allows us to use components. Plugins. So this is just in the main CSS entry point. So that would be in main.css, I think I called it. Yep, right here. So we can just put it anywhere here. I'll just put it above here. And that should rebuild. It did. See how it looks. Okay, it still looks fine. But now we have to use, if we go to configuration, there's also a new section in the config file, the tailwind.js file, called plugins. So let's copy this. Let's go to our tailwind.js file. Where did it go? It goes right above advanced options. So let's go advanced right here. It's going to paste that in. And this is just an example of where to put custom plugins. The real path for this container plugin is actually in here. You don't have to worry about this when you install Tailwind normally, because it will come like this by default. So that's the default container plugin. Container has now been extracted to a plugin, and that should work. Cool, and let's check if this still looks good. And it does. Let me just show you something. So if I remove this plugin, then there'll no longer be a container. So if I go back, you see there's no more container here. So we need that plugin, and it's there by default on the new installations of Tailwind. Okay, so now I just want to set up my new project. I'm going to go to my routes file. I'm going to leave this one here, but we can add a new one. Call it YouTube, and we'll return YouTube. And let's make that view. YouTube.blade.php. And just need this Tailwind example YouTube, and I'm going to make a new CSS file. It's going to be called youtube.css, and let me just put some stuff in here. And then let's make that new CSS file. So assets, CSS, new one called YouTube.css. And let me just copy the default, which is, I think we had it up here, right here. Let me just copy this, paste that in, and I have to change my webpack file. So before we were doing main.css, now let's do YouTube.css. We're going to use the same config, and that should be good. Let's try that out. Let's see, where are we? /YouTube. Okay, so this is our starting point. Let me just make sure if it's working. Class equals BG blue. And it doesn't look like it's working. Let me restart this npm run watch. /YouTube. Okay, there we go. Let's try again. BG red. There you go. Okay. So let me just close some stuff here. We'll leave the docs open. We need these plugins. This and this. Okay, so let's take a look at YouTube here. So this layout is not as involved as Twitter. And usually I like to plan out my layout, and usually it works out pretty well. So I want to make use of CSS Grid, like I said, the CSS Grid plugin, just for the sake of using it. If this were a real project, I'd probably just be okay with the width, using width flexbox utilities like we did in the last video. But I'm going to be using CSS Grid here for anything that requires a grid. So here's what I'm going to do. I see two columns here. First of all, this whole layout is not contained within a container. It's full width, and there's just some padding on the left and the right over here. But there is a container over here. So that's what we're going to do. As for the grids, I see two. I see this small left sidebar, and I see the right side with the videos. So we'll do that, and that's basically it. And we have this, it's 3 sections. We just have this top bar, and then we have these 2 bars, and it's not very involved, like I said. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with this top bar over here, and we'll start by pulling in the plugin. Actually, first let me start by importing Font Awesome, which we'll make use of. As for the icons, like I said, I'm just going to use Font Awesome. It's not exact. Some of the icons I couldn't find in Font Awesome, but use any icon pack you like, or you can even just view the source and grab the SVG icons from within YouTube if you want to go that far. Okay, let's take a look at the background color. You might not be able to see it, but this top bar is white, and this section is a very, very, very light gray, and this left sidebar is slightly darker than this. So I'm going to set the background as this. So I'm going to set this to BG gray lighter. And I'm going to start on that top bar. So let's go ahead and do that. Top bar. I actually like naming the sections because when I'm scrolling through my document, it's just easier to see if there's a name involved with it, even though I'm not using it in my CSS. It's just for naming purposes. So it's going to be white. If you look at YouTube, there's a subtle shadow. So there's a utility called shadow, and the default is good enough for me. We're going to give it some padding on the left and the right of 8. And we're going to give it some padding on the top and the bottom of 3. And let's just drop this text in there to see how it looks. Let me just put this here. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So now, like I said, I want to make use of CSS Grid. So we have to pull in that plugin. So the plugin we're going to use is this one. And if we take a look at the documentation, it's pretty straightforward actually. There's one thing I have to figure out, and I'll show you. He's using yarn here, but we can just use npm if we want. We need to npm install. I'm sorry, this is the other package we're going to use. This is the transitions one. I meant to go to this one. The CSS Grid one is within this repo, and here is the CSS Grid one. For this one, there is no npm repo for this yet. All we have to do is just manually take it from here and put it in our code. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go into plugins, CSS Grid, index.js, and it's just this code, and we have to put that in our project. Now eventually, I think in the future there's going to be an official repo, so if you're watching this in the future, just take a look if there's an official repo. But for now, we have to make a new folder called, you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to name it plugins. Let's make a new folder in here called CSS Grid. And, oh crap, sorry. I meant make a folder. And within here, we want to make index.js. And we want to paste our code in. And now to use this, let's go back to the documentation. We just paste this code, sorry, not that one. We just paste this code in our plugins array. So let's go ahead and grab this. Go to Tailwind JS, leave this one, and we can require this new one. So it's requiring it in this path, which we just made. And these are the grid sizes. So any columns that we're going to use, you can just specify in here. These ones are good, but if you need like 4, then you can go ahead and put 4 in there. If you need 11, you can put 11 in there. And anything that's missing, you can put in there. But if you don't add all of them, it reduces the overall compiled CSS file a bit less. And these are the gap sizes. So just add in any more if you want. But the defaults are good for me. Let's go ahead and save that. See if that works. Okay. And now in our markup, so I want to make this display grid. So I'll put that right here. So this will set this to a grid. And again, if you look at the documentation, this allows you to specify how many columns you want. So I want 12 because I'm going to be splitting it up 2 and 10 for this layout. So we can specify grid columns 12. And that's not going to do anything yet because we have to specify our grid items. Actually it does. It splits it up into 12. So this is 1/12. But like I said, I want this to be 2 and 10. So to do that, we can use this syntax to specify how much we want each grid item to span. So let me just show you what I mean. So for this first grid item, I want it to span 2. So it's going to be call span 2. So call span 2. Just put some stuff in there so you can see it. And for the next grid item, I want call span 10. I hope that makes sense. So there you go. This is 2 and this is 10. So all that's doing, if you're familiar with CSS Grid, is it's setting a grid column start to 2, and for this one it's setting it to 10. And for the main grid, it's setting it to 12 fractions. Okay, so let's start off with this section over here. So this is the first thing. Just pull in that hamburger icon. So it'll be right here. So let me just make this a flex container, and let me just make sure everything is vertically centered. And we're going to have 2 items in there. We're going to have the hamburger menu and the logo. So for the hamburger menu, it's just font awesome, and the class is FA bars. See how that looks? Okay, I'm going to change the color on that and change it to text gray dark, and it's actually a link. So let's just wrap it in anchor tags and see how that looks. Okay, it looks good. Now let's add the logo. Just see if it's placed correctly. Okay, actually let's add a margin right to this. 8. It's good. There we go. And for the logo, I literally just copied it from here. It's just an SVG, and I'm going to paste it in. The only thing I added here is a class of width 24, and that's going to set it to a decent size. And again, that should be a link. Pretty much everything here is a link, so keep that in mind. I'm always going back and changing my divs to links, or just adding a new anchor tag, because I keep forgetting that everything is a link. Okay, what's next? Next is, in the next column, we want this search bar. And within the search bar, I'm going to do flexbox, and I'm going to justify content space between, so one's on the left and one's on the right. Okay, so let's do that. So down here, where we have this other section, I'm going to work on the search, and let's make it a div. Let's make it a form. You don't have to, but let's make it a form anyways. And I'm going to make it a flex item as well. Let me show you why. Because there's this, and then there's submit button, so I want that to be right beside it. So we'll use flexbox for that. And then input type equals text. So class equals border. There's a very subtle gray border on it, so let's do that. Border gray. The padding on it is that. The width is, 128. And I think I added this before in the last video. 128 is not default. Where's the width? No, not that. Width. Right here. Okay, so it's not here. I guess I didn't add it. So let's add it right now. 128. So 128 divided by 4 is 32. So 32 rems. Cool. All right. And let's set a placeholder. Alright, see how that looks. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now let's put the submit button. So button type equals submit, class equals, okay, so since it's right up against it, we only want a border on the top, right, and the bottom. So let's go ahead and do that. So what are we doing? Border T, border R, border B, border gray, PY2, PX6, and I want the background to be this color. I also want a hover, just to be slightly darker when we hover upon it. And let's see how that looks. Oh, I forgot the icon. Let's put the icon in. And it's just FA-search. And I also want it to be this color. Again, I've done this before already, so it may look like magic, but when I was doing it, just back and forth and tweaking little things. So yeah, it looks good to me. So let's work on this right section now. So don't worry about this. This is TubeBuddy, which is a plugin. So it's these four. And this icon literally just changed today. It was just an upload icon before, so I'm just going to use that. And let's go ahead and do that. So it's going to be the next flex item, which is this. Actually, I want this to be flexbox as well. I want it to be vertically centered. And everything's a link. And everything's an icon as well. Except the last one, which is our avatar. So first one's FA upload. Sorry, there should be a dash there. There should be no dash there. Okay, and I want it to be text gray, dark, and I want a margin to the right. Let me just grab this because I'm going to be copying that and using it in these ones as well. So the other ones are calendar. I don't have a proper icon for that. I mean, Font Awesome doesn't have a proper icon for that, so I just use something similar, which is the calendar, and we have a bell. And for this last one, let me just show you how that looks. And it is not in the right place because I forgot to set this to flexbox. So flex, items, center, justify, between. See if that works. Okay, I think it's behind here. Yep, there it is. Cool, and now let's just add our avatar. So here, image. I already have all the images in my public folder, so img, YouTube, avatar top.jpg, alt is avatar, and set the class. Rounded, full, width 8. And that should do it. There we go, looking good. And we have our top nav done. And it looks pretty good. Now let's work on this left sidebar. And we're going to do something similar. So wherever we set the grid, where is it? Here. We are just going to copy that. And what is this close? Top bar. So that's why I like to name it, just so I can do this and end it, so I know where I am when I'm scrolling through. So this is going to be called, what am I going to call this? Let's call it YouTube body. And it's going to be grid as well. Grid columns 12. So let's close that. And the YouTube body. And then the next div is going to be the left sidebar. So left sidebar. And we're going to do call span 2. And just some padding that I already figured out. And let's just see how that looks. Put a lot of text in there just to see how it looks. Okay. Now I'm not going to set a padding here. Let me show you why. Because I want a hover state which spans the entire width of that container. I'm not sure if you can see this, but we're going to do that. That's why I didn't set the padding here. I'll set it on each of the items. And also for this background, gray, let's just see how this looks. Okay, that's too dark for me. So if I go lighter, let's try light. Okay, let's stick with light. Now, if that's too dark for you, you can just create your own custom color in your tailwind.js file and use that instead. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do that because I feel like this is still too dark. So if I go to my Tailwind and look for the colors section right here, I can just add a new one here. I call it Gray Custom, and that's the color for it. And that compiled, and now I can use that. So Gray Custom. See how that looks. And it's slightly lighter, and I like this, so we'll stick with this. And I want this to always be the full height of the viewport. So I want to do something like 100 viewport height. So in Tailwind, that actually exists. If you do min h screen. So there you go. It's always going to be the height of the viewport. Okay, so let's start working on these menu items. And I'm just going to do one, and then I'll paste the rest to save time. So let's go ahead and start working on that. So the first one is this section. Okay. So let me just remove this. I'm going to make a new div, and this div will just be the container of this first one. And then I'll start working on the items. So it's a link like everything else is. Class is, it's going to be flexbox again because I want these two to be right up on each other. So flex. I pretty much always use flex and item center together. So if this were real, I'd probably extract that to a component. MB2 text black, and that should be good. And within this, I want an icon. Which icon is this? Home. FA home. I sort of want it to be a bit bigger. I want it to be fixed width. FW is the fixed width in Font Awesome. I want it to be text gray, dark, and I want a margin right of 4. And see how that looks. Cool. And let's just add the text in there. So I want it to be semi-bold and slightly smaller. Home. Just do that. See how that looks. Okay. And as you can see, there's an underline there, which we don't want. So I'm going to go to my main CSS, and right here we can just take that out. Text decoration, none. There you go. Actually, this one should be the selected one, so that should be red. Let's fix that. Right here, we can just do red. Cool. Alright, so if we just paste 2 more, that should look pretty good actually. It does. But the other 2 don't have red icons, so let's just actually gray, dark. Cool. Alright, what's next? Actually, I'm gonna go behind the scenes and just fix the icons and the text. Okay, now let's work on the hover effect. If you look at YouTube, there is a subtle hover over here, and there's a background going on. And we'll also make use of this transitions plugin. So back here, to do a hover, all we have to do is hover BG, whatever color you want. So let's try gray light. Okay, so that looks pretty good. But let's just make it a bit darker so we can see it. So you guys can see it actually. Okay. Cool. And just put that on everything. Okay, cool. And to use transitions, it's really easy. I already installed it earlier, so I did this. And all I have to do is, so this is the way to import it if you want to use import statements, but we can't do that in Laravel Mix. So the way to use the plugin is just like this. So if we go to our plugin section, if we just require, let's go back, this, so require this, and just called the default method on it, then that should work. See if that compiles, and it does. Cool. And if you look at the plugin documentation, here are the transition times for the utilities that it has. So all we have to do is add that transition class and it will automatically transition. That's how easy it is. All we have to do is right here, should do it for all of them, transition. Let's do transition slow so you can see it. And that's it. That did not work. Refresh that. There you go. I had to do a hard refresh, but there you go. You can see the transitions working by adding just one class. And I really, really like that. Okay, now what's next? Let's work on the next section. Actually, this is pretty much exactly like this. So I'm just going to go behind the scenes and add all of these. This is just spacing and icons. And yeah, I'm just going to go behind the scenes and finish this whole sidebar off to save time, because it's pretty much exactly the same as this, and it's just basic spacing and colors. Okay, so I finished off this left sidebar. Like I said, it's nothing we haven't done already. The only thing worth mentioning is for the margin in between this avatar and the username, I added this margin right 5 because 4 was too little and 6 was too much, so I added this 5, which works nicely. Okay, so the next section is the actual YouTube videos. So let's go ahead and work on that. So back to our view. So where does that end? Here. Actually here we want it to end. This should end the left sidebar if I'm correct. And it does. Let me just label that so I know where I am. And left sidebar. And we're going to add a new section which has a call span of 10. Actually, let me name it and call it YouTube videos. And let me just end it. Sorry. And let me just see if I'm in the right spot. Okay, I am. So this section, like I said before, actually has a container. So let's make a container. Let me just move this up for you guys. Okay, so container, and we want it to be centered, so we'll do MX Auto, and we want some padding. See if that, okay, so that looks good. So let's go ahead and start working on these sections. So the first one is the recommended section. So let me just remove that, and let's go font semi-bold, margin bottom of 6. I don't know why that didn't work. MB6 and recommended. Okay. And the next thing we want to do is the actual grid of videos. Now if you see, there are 6 here, but I'm going to use 5. Let me show you why I use 5, because this sidebar here is actually smaller. Ours is a bit wider because 1 was too small and 2 was a bit wider, so I just went with 2. So we have less space in this right column over here. Therefore 6 will fit, but it'll be a bit cramped, so I'm just going to do 5. So we'll make a new section and we'll use grid again. So that grid columns 5, grid gap of 2, and margin bottom. So if I do 5 divs, it should be 5 columns. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See if that works, and it works. So now we're just gonna place these thumbnails and the title and the metadata of that video. We'll do 1, I'll paste it across, and then pretty much everything else except this is pretty similar. It's just recommending different videos. So let's just work on 1, and then the rest should be pretty straightforward. Okay, so we have the thumbnail. And again, that's a link because everything's a link. And then we have an image. I'm going to make it go here to thumbnail1.jpg. Alt equals thumb, and the class. I'm going to give it margin bottom. It's very small margin, and we'll leave it at that for the thumbnail. Just see how that looks. Okay, so it looks pretty good. And let's give it a transition similar to this, but instead of transitioning the background color, let's transition the opacity. So how do we do that? We can just do hover opacity 75, but by default you can't hover for opacity utilities. If you go to the documentation, search for opacity, you'll see that you have to add a variant. So for opacity, by default it's only responsive. We want it to hover as well. So let's go to our Tailwind JS, search for modules. There you go. So for hover, you can do this for any of these properties. So where's hover? Sorry, I meant opacity. So we'll just add hover here, and that should work. Cool. And now this should work. Did I add it? Yes, I did. Hover opacity 75. Okay. So there you go. But now we can just do transition slow like we've been doing. And I think I have to refresh for some reason. And there you go. Now we have a nice transition. Okay, so let's work on the title and the metadata. Okay. Let's make another div dot text smaller, and let's give it some margin. And let's make a link. Let's make it black actually. And the title is Piggy Dude on Nightmare Mode. See how that looks. Okay, looks okay to me. Next is the user. So let's make a div. Same with this. Let's make it gray. And on hover, let's make it black. And it is a video by Dashy Games, who's hilarious. And we want a icon for that verified check. Check circle. And actually this should be within. So let me just put it here. Cool, see if that works. And that is a little light for me. Change it to dark. Okay, that's better. And one more for, not sure why I use a span here. You can, but I'll stick with divs. Alright, so the last one is just the video details. So text small again, text gray dark, a lot of views, mid dot 2 days ago. Okay, so that looks good to me. Actually, Should that be a link too? No, it doesn't matter. Okay, that looks good. And I am just going to paste this across these 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And we have the transition going. And what does this end? Ends to grid. So I'm going to copy that because I want another row. And let's do another row. See how that looks. That looks good to me. And yeah, I did the recommended first because YouTube changes its order every time you refresh it, or if you visit it at different times of the day. What's next? So I'll just a little show more link. So let's add that. So if I just go here, I think text small, text gray dark, uppercase, show more, and actually this should be a link. How come it's not a link? Oh, because I did not do href. Okay, and yeah, it looks good to me. See how it looks. Yep. Now let's add the horizontal rule. So it's just border B, border solid, and let's give it a margin. And we should also put a margin on that show more. And it's not adding it. How about we just put this whole thing in a div, and we put the MB6 on that, which is what I normally do anyways. Okay, that's better. Okay, so the rest is pretty much the same. There's a slight difference for these ones where it's recommending a user. There's a little avatar here, and there's a little X button. And this one is slightly different as well, where it just shows 1. So I'm going to go behind the scenes and show you. I'm going to go behind the scenes and do them, but I'll show you the slight differences. Okay, so I added a few more sections here, and this section is, like I said, pretty much exactly like this, but we have this section where it's just, again, I'm using Flexbox here, and then I'm using Flexbox here as well to justify the content space between, which I've been doing several times. And this one is slightly different, but let me just show you. So for the tube, for this one, against Flexbox, and here are the 2 items. It's just this, and this is the close button. And for this section, what am I doing here? Yeah, so here it's just Flexbox. I'm not using grid for this because there isn't 5 columns, there's only 1. And this is 1 flex item, and this is the other flex item. Alright, so let's work on responsiveness and we'll call it a day. Tailwind uses a mobile first approach, so we're going to have to slightly adjust our layout to account for that. So if you remember, we have CSS Grid and we're defining a call span of 2 here and 10 here on this side. So on mobile, we want it to be, I'm just going to do one breakpoint, but you can do multiple breakpoints. So on mobile, we just wanted to set it to a full width, so a call span of 12, and then when it gets to this large breakpoint, we can set it to 2 and 10. So let me just look for call span 10. Let's do this one first. So this one is this. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it call span 10 only after a large breakpoint, and by default it's call span 12, so it's full width. Same with the first row, or the first column, sorry. Let's do this one first. So when it's large it's 2, but by default it is full width. So let's see how that looks. Let me just, there you go. So that's the breakpoint. I believe it's 992. So right there, here's the menu, and there is the content. So let's go ahead and work on this as well. So we're also using CSS Grid there. So let's find that recommended. So on large, after we hit the breakpoint, we want that. But by default, we just want 1. Again, you can have multiple breakpoints, but I'm just doing 1. So there you go. That fixed that. And we have to do it for these as well. So wherever there's grid, columns 5. Okay, large, grid, columns 1 by default, and same here. Grid, columns 1, large. Okay, looks good. See how this one looks. Okay, let's just change the flex direction for this one after the breakpoint, so it stacks. So where is that? It's right here. So the direction, I believe, is flex row and flex call. So by default, I mean, once it gets to large, we want it to be flex row, like it already is. But on mobile, we want it to be flex call. And that should do it. That did not work. Oh, sorry, that should be not here, but here. That should do it. Sorry. There you go, and that's stacked. Cool. Now we can do the same for the menu. So we can make this stack with this. So let's find that as well. So call span 2, okay, so large call span 2, but by default call span 12. And then for the call span 10, let's do large, and then call span 12 by default. See if that stacks. Okay, it does stack. And let's change the flex direction of this as well. So where's that? Right here. Right here. So by default it's flex column, but when it gets too large it's flex row. There you go, it stacks. Let's also add some margin. Let's add a margin top on these buttons. So these buttons right here. So when it's large, should be no margin, but by default, some margin. There you go, and that looks pretty good to me. Actually, we can make this search box smaller. Right here. So when it's large, but by default, we can do like 64, half of it. There you go. And let's make sure our desktop view still works, and it does. So there you have it, guys. We've managed to use the latest version of Tailwind CSS along with some of its plugins to flush out this YouTube design. Like I said earlier, this version of Tailwind just came out a week ago, so I'm sure the plugins will change in the future. For example, I think that the plugins are going to have their own NPM repo, and some of them might even be pulled into core, like the transitions plugin. I have a strong feeling that it's going to be pulled into core, and maybe even the CSS Grid one, which is pretty much all I can ask for. I'm sure there's going to be new plugins that come out that are super useful, but for now I'm pretty happy. As you can see, this design is pretty much all utilities, and I'm really excited to see where Tailwind goes. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one. Okay, thanks, bye!